the most reasonable that, okay, what he's referring to is when the Babylonians came to Jerusalem and conquered it. You know, whether it was in like 597 when they really just exiled all the people and just attacked it, or even in 586 when they just destroyed the city, destroyed the temple, you know, around there. That seems to fit. Not a whole lot else in Israel's history really fits this situation. So I would say we should think of it as talking about that time period when the Babylonians came and conquered Jerusalem. And so Obadiah has some things to say about what Edom did during that time when the Babylonians came and conquered the Israelite city of Jerusalem. So with that in mind, there's a lot more we could say about that, but we have one class to cover everything in Obadiah that we can. But let's just read the book. Let's read through Obadiah, and then we'll kind of look at it a little bit in closer detail, and then ask the question, why is this relevant for us? So Obadiah, verse 1. The vision of Obadiah. Thus says the Lord God concerning Edom. We have heard a report from the Lord, and a messenger has been sent among the nations. Rise up, let us rise against her for battle. Behold, I will make you small among the nations. You shall be utterly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you, you who live in the clefts of the rock, in your lofty dwelling, who say in your heart, who will bring me down to the ground? Though you soar aloft like the eagle, though your nest is set among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. If thieves came to you, if plunderers came by night, how you have been destroyed. Would they not steal only enough for themselves? If grape gatherers came to you, would they not leave gleanings? How Esau has been pillaged, his treasures sought out. All your allies have driven you to your border. Those at peace with you have deceived you. They have prevailed against you. Those who eat your bread have set a trap beneath you. You have no understanding. Will I not on that day, declares the Lord, destroy the wise men out of Edom and understanding out of Mount Esau? And your mighty men shall be dismayed, O Teman, so that every man from Mount Esau will be cut off by slaughter. Because of the violence done to your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. On the day that you stood aloof, on the day that strangers carried off his wealth, and foreigners entered his gates, and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. But do not gloat over the day of your brother in the day of his misfortune. Do not rejoice over the people of Judah in the day of their ruin. Do not boast in the day of distress. Do not enter the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Do not gloat over his disaster in the day of his calamity. Do not loot his wealth in the day of his calamity. Do not stand at the crossroads to cut off his fugitives. Do not hand over his survivors in the day of distress. For the day of the Lord is near upon all the nations. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deeds shall return on your own head. For as you have drunk on my holy mountain, so all the nations shall drink continually. They shall drink and swallow and shall be as though they had never been. But in Mount Zion there shall be those who escape, and it shall be holy. And the house of Jacob shall possess their own possessions. The house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau stubble. They shall burn them and consume them, and there shall be no survivor for the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. Those of the Negeb shall possess Mount Esau, and those of the Shephelah shall possess the land of the Philistines. They shall possess the land of Ephraim and the land of Samaria, and Benjamin shall possess Gilead. The exiles of this host of the people of Israel shall possess the land of the Canaanites as far as Zarephath, and the exiles of Jerusalem who are in Sepharad shall possess the cities of the Negeb. Saviors shall go up to Mount Zion to rule Mount Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's. This is a really interesting, exciting book. I just think it's got some great phraseology in it, really powerful. Well, let's just kind of look at it in detail. Obviously, this is not good news for Edom. Hopefully everybody got that the Edomites wouldn't say, well, that sounds wonderful. No, I mean, this is a prophecy against Edom, talking about the punishment that's going to come upon them. So God says, behold, I will make you small among the nations. You shall be utterly despised. He says, I'm going to bring you down. You're going to be small among the nations. And then kind of, pretty immediately in the book, verse 3, what's the criticism? What's the major criticism that Obadiah, or God through Obadiah, has against the Edomites? Yeah, I mean, just absolute pride. He says, the pride of your heart has deceived you, you who live in the clefts of the rock in your lofty dwelling, who say in your heart, who will bring me down to the ground? And the Edomites did live just in mountainous regions with towering cliffs and narrow canyons. I mean, it was a pretty impregnable place to live. I mean, it would have been very difficult for somebody to attack Edom. It had a lot of its strategic advantages living there in that area. So you can see why they think, I mean, we live in a place that is just hard to conquer. It is hard to attack, which means nobody can attack us, right, is the attitude that then would develop. And so God says, you're proud, you think that you're invincible, but of course you're not. You may be invincible against this nation or this nation, but not against me. You're not invincible against me when I come and attack, when I come in judgment. Let's see. He goes on to describe what's going to happen to Edom. And he makes this point. If thieves came and robbed you, they wouldn't take everything, right? I don't think when somebody's house gets broken into and they get robbed that every single thing they own is taken. Like, well, no. I mean, thieves don't literally take every object. There's some things left over. Same thing with grape gatherers. People that gather grapes, they don't literally take every single grape in the vineyard. There are some on the ground. There are some left over. But not so with Edom. Edom is going to be ransacked and nothing will be left over. That's what Obadiah is implying here. All of Esau's treasures will be taken. Everything Esau owns will be pillaged. And it'll be done by Esau's allies. Those that Esau thought, well, we're good. We're allies. Those people will betray Esau. People that Esau thought we were on good terms, they'll be the ones to inflict this destruction on Esau, which is very significant because of the criticism that comes comes later. So the next thing, starting in verse, verses 10 and 11. What really is Esau's primary crime here? I mean, what's their primary sin? Really, I think just the reason for the whole book is because of what? Yeah, I mean, they are proud, but more specifically, it's, okay, you are proud, and that's why you think you won't be taken down, but you have mistreated my people, right? And so that's what verse 10 says, because of the violence done to your brother Jacob. He goes on to just really, describe and telling them, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And it's the idea that, if we're correct, that this is referring to when Babylon came against Jerusalem, that Esau was there. Now, maybe they didn't lead the charge against Jerusalem. Maybe they didn't kick down the doors. Maybe they didn't go in and engage everybody directly in battle, but they were there and loved it. They were there and supported the Babylonians. They were there and they were happy. They were gloating, rejoicing that Israel would fall. And not just that, I mean, some of these lines throughout this chapter, I mean, they went in too and they looted the city. They went in there and they took stuff that Babylon didn't take. They joined in. You know, they profited, they benefited from this destruction that Babylon brought upon Israel. And even it goes into a little more detail and says, you know, even some of the survivors that were fleeing, the Edomites stopped them, cut them off, and handed them over. So, I mean, you know, well, we didn't invade Jerusalem. Like, well, you pretty much did. You know, I mean, Obadiah even says, you were one of them. You were just like one of them. You were rejoicing. You were gloating. And what makes it all the worse is that it's not just some nation that you were gloating that they fell and looting them and helping their enemies defeat them. It's not just some nation. It's your brother nation. It's the Israelites, and you're the Edomites, and you have the same ancestor, and you're related. And it's stressed when he says, the violence done to your brother Jacob. You know, it's personal. This is not somebody you should have been against. This is somebody that should be an ally, should be somebody that you are helping, assisting, somebody that you should be, you know, at least on their side, even if you can't stop the Babylonians. At least help the survivors. At least don't, you know, rejoice in the downfall of your brother nation. So, I mean, it's not just what Edom did. It's who he did it to. This is a nation related to you. And so there's a major criticism there. And we know that that really is the attitude that Edom had. If you read Psalm 137, the psalm is just lamenting what happened to Jerusalem. And one of the things brought up is that the Edomites were cheering for Jerusalem to be leveled. You know, the Edomites said, you know, raise it to the ground. Not raise it like, raise it up, but the other word, you know, raise it, you know, destroy it, flatten it, level it. You know, the Edomites cheered that they wanted this to happen. They were happy that Israel was taken down. So Psalm 137 includes that detail in there, that Edom was happy to see us fall. So that's, you know, this I think the major reason for this prophecy, for this prophecy of judgment against Edom. And then, of course, it goes on to describe what God's going to do. And so you have this phrase, the day of the Lord is near upon all the nations. And that phrase, the day of the Lord, I think we've talked about it some in here before, is used by the prophets, the day of the Lord, really to refer to any time that God specifically is going to come in judgment against his enemies and then rescue his faithful people. And so the prophets will use that phrase, and they're not always talking about the same day of the Lord. There may be a specific day of the Lord against this nation and to rescue these people. But that's what God is saying here, is that I have a day where not only am I coming against Edom, I'm coming against all the nations to destroy them and to do to them what they've done to Israel. He says, as you have done, it should be done to you. And then he says, but in Mount Zion, you know, in Jerusalem, there'll be survivors. No survivors anywhere else, but in Jerusalem, there'll be those who survive. And I love the imagery here that Jacob will be a fire. So the Israelites, they'll be a fire, and even includes the northern nation, the house of Joseph. So you have the Israelites. The Israelite nation is a fire, it's a flame, and Esau is stubble, which just gets burned up. I mean, just absolutely destroyed, incinerated by the Israelites. And there'll be no survivors of Esau. And then he ends with this There'll be saviors that go up to Mount Zion. Mount Zion will be rescued. Mount Zion will be saved. You'll have these deliverers that are there and ruling over the Edomites. The Edomites will be the ones in subjection. And God will have his kingdom. And so there's a lot we could say about these verses. There's a lot of messianic ties. Some of these phrases, hint about and foreshadow and prophesy about what will ultimately happen in God's kingdom with Jesus as king. So there's so much we can say. But I want to make this point, at least for us, when we're thinking about, okay, how is this profitable for us to read this judgment prophecy against the Edomites? I want to make this point that Obadiah's prophecy, it was spoken to the Edomites, and maybe there's a little speculation in there. Did Obadiah actually go to the Edomite nation and say this to somebody there, or to the rulers there? I think so. I think he would do that. The way that Jonah also went to Nineveh, so that God would sometimes send out prophets to other nations. I think he actually went and said this. It's possible that maybe he just said this about them in the presence of Israelites. But it seems reasonable that he traveled there at some point and said this to the Edomites. But the important thing I want to point out is that Obadiah's words were written down. He spoke them to Edom, but they were written down for the Israelites. So the book of Obadiah that we're reading, the book of Obadiah, well, that wasn't given to Edom. They may have heard the spoken words, but it was written down and given to Israel, and Israel had it as part of their Bible, their scriptures. They had the book of Obadiah that was written down. So it was something that God wanted the Israelites to read and study and learn and profit from. Whether the Edomites remembered the prophecy, who knows? But Israel had it. It may have been about Edom, but God said, Israel, this is for you to read and to study and to learn from, which then helps us with this idea. Why would this have been profitable for the Israelites to hear? So any answers to that question? There's a lot of correct answers to that question, but why would Israel have profited from reading the book of Obadiah?
God has influence and power everywhere.
Yeah.
Not just Israel.
Oh, yeah. And that's huge, because the tendency was to think a God's power is limited to just this nation or just this area. But yeah, God makes it clear, oh no, what Edom did, that also is something I have power over, all the nations, not just limited to my Israelite nation. So yeah, I think that's huge. That'd be something that the Israelites would have benefited from knowing, that our God has that overarching power over all. What else? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think that's huge. That Edom thought, well, we're just amazing. No one can ever take us down. Well, that'd be a good thing for the Israelites to read, how God was critical of that, so that the Israelites would know, well, we don't ever need to have that attitude, that no one can ever defeat us, no matter what, because if we leave the Lord, we absolutely can be defeated. Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, Steve? Yeah.
I'm judging those who are judging you. And I still consider you my people. And he eventually judges Babylon too. But they will read this and see God still cares about them.
Yeah, and I think that really is so important, is that in a time when for Israel, it really just seems hopeless, that we don't have any hope of ever coming back from this destruction, that God has this for them that says, no, you are still my people. And I still have plans for you, and I have plans for you that are good. You know, I have this beneficial plan, this hope for you. That, yeah, I mean, when Israel is in just the depths of despair, which they would have been, I mean, when they see their nation just conquered and destroyed, and when they see or hear that the temple is leveled, I mean, just destroyed, you know, that God's dwelling place among them doesn't exist anymore. To have God still talking to them and talking about them as if my promises stand, my covenant with you stands, you are my people, I'm still here. And not just that, but that I saw what they did to you. I saw how they treated you. I'm not ignorant of that. I'm aware of what Edom, your brother nation, did to you, and I will avenge. That is a message Israel needed to hear and would have been so good for them to hear. Anything else? Yes?
I think there's quite a few secondary applications to be made here. When you look at families, for instance, you got a brother that kind of side against another brother, maybe because of envy, jealousy. And here's, that's to me what's going on here. And it's kind of a way to get back, to kind of help watch his downfall. And I see that happening at work, where people are supposed to be working together and kind of envy this one person. Next thing you know, they're on the other side and try to help bring them down. They'll go around it. They won't do it openly right at first, but they'll do it the other way. But I see all kinds of applications from that for us today.
Absolutely, yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, I mean, the way that Edom was about it was, well, we just kind of indirectly, you know, brought down Israel. You know, we weren't the main ones. I mean, yeah, that attitude is something that we absolutely, you know, have so often. Is that, well, I wasn't the one that did it. I was just, you know, enabled it, related to it, facilitated it, was happy about it, you know, took advantage of it. Yeah, I mean, those kind of things, absolutely. And especially, you know, when you're talking about the personal relationship here. This is brother nation and brother nation. You know, the idea that you know, we would do that with our physical families or spiritual families, that kind of treatment, absolutely, is something I think we can draw from this. All right, any other thoughts about what Israel would have learned or benefited from hearing the book of Obadiah? All right, well then let's bring this up. Why is this profitable for us today? You know, because, okay, I wasn't there. I don't really have any strong ties to what happened to Jerusalem back then. I mean, you know, it's interesting, and, you know, maybe we're indirectly connected because of, you know, what Jerusalem foreshadows for us and everything, but it wasn't personal for me when the Edomites came in and helped or gloated over and benefited from Israel's downfall. And, you know, I don't know any Edomites, you know, they're not around. So we have this question, okay, well, I mean, this is interesting, but why would it be profitable for us to hear an oracle of judgment against Edom and the other enemies of Israel in 2018, you know, with a Christian today? I think one of the good ways we can kind of summarize what happened, you know, that Obadiah is referring to is this. You have God's covenant people that are mistreated by their brothers who aren't God's covenant people. Right? That it's God's chosen nation and they have been horribly mistreated by people that aren't God's chosen nation. In fact, if you think about Esau's story, Esau the man, his story, you know, he rejected his birthright, right? I mean, sold it away. And so you even have that idea that, well, you aren't the chosen people because, you know, your founder gave that up. You know, he just, you know, sold it away. But that's really what's happening here. Well, I mean, has this ever happened to us? I mean, this sentence, would it ever be something that could apply to us? Well, absolutely, right? I mean, I'll say in our country in 2018, being mistreated by those that are not God's covenant people is not something that really happens to the degree it does in other parts of the world, as far as the violence and the oppression and just the hatred and mistreatment. And not something I think that happens as much as it has throughout history. So maybe we can't identify with this as much because we haven't necessarily experienced somebody who has been violent toward us because we are God's covenant people. Not saying we've never been mistreated, but I don't know that we maybe long for these passages and find as much comfort in these passages because we haven't quite experienced the feelings that Israel would have felt when they have been so terribly mistreated and are just in agony and despair. And those are the people who did it. You know, I think it's tough sometimes for us to identify with that. But still, I mean, this does happen even to us today, that you have people that are not Christians, and they're not God's covenant people. You know, like Esau, you know, they don't want that birthright, and they want other things. You know, they want the red stew instead of God's covenant, God's blessings, God's promises. And yet, those of us who do have a covenant relationship with God through Jesus Christ, we're hated and we're mistreated, and we are facing that kind of attitude and that kind of mistreatment by those that are not His people. And so there's a couple things I'm going to go through. I think I have 4. Let me see. Yeah. I just have 4 points I'm going to make that I think we can learn from Obadiah. And then I'll open it up and take any comments. First of all, God's faithfulness to His covenant. We've kind of said this, Israel was just in absolute dismay and destruction and all of that. And yet God clearly says, I'm going to do this and this and this and this. And that's what He said He would do in regards to His covenant with His people. And yet everything's destroyed. But what it shows is, God's still going to be faithful to His covenant. I mean, He's not going to abandon His people. He's not going to reject that. He is still faithful to His covenant, which will be such a source of hope for the Israelites. Well, the same thing's true for us today. That no matter what happens to us, no matter what happens to us, God isn't going to then change what He promised He'd do for us. He's not going to go against these promises He's made to us, His covenant. He's not going to reject that and, I'll just find a new people. That's not going to happen. And so that's such a source of hope for us too. And then God's power to bring about His plans, right? Because if you got the book of Obadiah and you're an Israelite, it doesn't look like God's plans are going to come true. It doesn't look like God is going to be able to do this because, Jerusalem is in ruins. His people are exiled. Edom's sitting in the cliffs, happy, prideful, rejoicing. Babylon's in power. It just doesn't look like God has that much power. It doesn't look like He can do this. And yet what the book of Obadiah says is, oh no, God has a day He's coming to set things right. He can't accomplish those plans. And then this is related. Just the idea that kingdoms of men look strong, but they're not. And that not just back then, but even today. Kingdoms on earth that are ruled by men look like they are powerful, and yet they are absolutely powerless compared to God. And I think sometimes we think, those other nations out there look so powerful, but not ours. And we're referring to America. No, America is one of the nations. America is one of the kingdoms of men. And I am appreciative of our country and all the blessings that it has for us. But America is still just a weak nation run by men compared to God and His kingdom, which is not a kingdom of man. It's not a kingdom that is ruled by humans. It is a kingdom ruled by God. And so by comparison, doesn't matter what we can see and what it looks like. I mean, God's kingdom, we can't see it right now, but is absolutely invincible. And so that's what we need to keep in mind, no matter what's happening around our world and what's happening in our country. And then finally, God takes it personally when we are mistreated. I think that's huge, because it's not just that you oppressed your brother, Jacob, it's that you oppressed my people. In fact, he even says, let's see, I'm not sure what, verse 13, God doesn't say, don't enter the gate of Judah, don't enter the gate of Jerusalem. He says, don't enter the gate of my people. You know, they are my people, and you have mistreated them. And I take that personally because they are mine. Well, that's how God feels about us, right? It's not just, well, if we are mistreated, we need to endure, and then at some point God will, make things right. It's more personal than that, that mistreating God's people is mistreating God in God's eyes. And He has expressed that. And so that's just an absolute source of comfort for us. All right, any thoughts on anything that we've gone over? We have a couple minutes. Yes, Wally.
I just want to stress the fact that God is faithful to His covenant, His promises. But at the same time, we have Christians that are still being mistreated. We may not see it here, but you go to other countries, yes. So we have to understand the fact that there are people still suffering from their fellow brothers. Even though it's not happening to us, doesn't mean it's not happening to them.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I think that's why people in those situations, I think they gravitate more toward the prophets, and especially prophecies like this, than we do, because they understand how it would feel to be in that situation. They've been through that same kind of thing. And so I think a lot of times they do identify more with those sections of Scripture. So yeah, that kind of thing is happening, absolutely. Yeah. Anything else? Yes.
You might not know the answer to this, but was Israel expected to be faithful to Edom in the same way that Edom was expected to be kind of faithful and loyal to Israel, at least from what it says here? Because it seems like in other parts of the Old Testament, Israel did not have the same, like they were expected to kind of like have dominion over Edom in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends on when you're talking about. I mean, in the ultimate sense, yes. They're told, do not oppress Edom. It's your brother. They weren't allowed to go in there and just fight with Edom when they left Egypt. They had to go around. Yes, but you will see, Edom doesn't treat Israel correctly all the time. And so you will see that ultimately, that David conquers Edom. And that, but then there's times when, later on in history, an Edomite or the Edomites break out against Israel again. But yes, they're supposed to be allies, and Israel was expected to be that. However, if your allies are attacking you, David put a stop to that. Edom was not subservient, and so David did do that. Yeah. All right. Well, I know we're out of time. If there's any other comments or you want to talk any further, please talk to me after class. I'd love to do that. For next week, we're going to talk about the imprecatory Psalms. If you want to jot these down real quick and read these are Psalms where the psalmist is asking God to bring punishment on enemies, to afflict them, to punish them. to destroy them even. And so we're going to talk about some of those next week. All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it.